Hello, friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and back at our Creepmas celebration that you and I had, I was gifted a few books that would be relevant for ghouls.
Yes.
One of which was the Book of Phobias and Manias by Kate Summerscale, which is written like an encyclopedia, basically. So it has a variety of phobias and manias listed with a little blurb about them. So I figured it was high time that I picked something out of this book to delve into. And I have selected choreomania.
Ooh.
Do you have any idea what that might be about, Midge?
As in the Florence and the Machine song?
It is as in the Florence and the Machine song.
We're gonna dance ourselves to death today?
Yep. Choreomania, also known as dancing mania or a dancing plague.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we talked about some good old fashioned mass hysteria, Midge.
Yeah.
So let's get into it today.
I am so ready.
Yes. So, as I said, the book version is kind of like just a blurb. So I did go a little deeper in this. I read an article by John Waller in the British Psychological Society called Dancing Plagues and Mass Hysteria. Another article that I'll mention later. And then I was also just kind of generally familiar from the internet. There's a great puppet history episode about it for the Watcher girlies.
There
Uh,
surely is. That's one of my favorite puppet
yeah,
history episodes.
yeah, so this may be one that some folks know about, but hopefully you'll enjoy hearing about it. And if it is new to you, uh, let's get
Get,
into it.
get ready for some
Get
wild shit.
ready. Get
Yeah.
ready. What is a dancing mania? So this is one of those things that is not necessarily creatively named. It's pretty straightforward. Choreomania describes a phenomenon where large groups of people would be compelled to dance until the point of injury or exhaustion in what seemed to be an altered state of consciousness. So observers would say that people seemed like they were in a trance, not fully in control of themselves. People would often like shout and like call out for God to be like, save me from the dancing, you know, like you do. And I will say that I did lie a little bit when I said that it was straightforward, because primary sources also describe women revealing their bosoms, quote,
Sure.
and it sounds like maybe people were like doing it. So it was like partly orgy, partly dancing. Sounds like kind of like a general purpose, like rager from what I can tell.
There was
Uh,
Sandstorm was playing.
yes.
Yeah.
Sandstorm was pumping nonstop. It was like, I don't know if anyone else, I somehow end up like on like EDM TikTok, even though I
I
enjoy
can't
listening to it
say
fine
that's
enough.
happened to me.
Okay.
No.
So I'm always on these TikToks of like these huge like crowds at these giant music festivals and like all the crazy projections they do, and I'm like,
Okay.
I admire this on my phone. I would never want to be there. Uh,
No. Nope.
so I can't say that I want to be part of a dancing mania, but I mean, you don't really have a choice in it from what
Yeah,
you
it
can
seems
tell. So
seems like it's pretty involuntary.
yes. So groups of people would dance nonstop, with only like brief rests for days or even weeks at a time in this crazed frenzy, until they were suffering from chest pains, hallucinating, feet were bleeding. Many times people would eventually collapse from exhaustion. Some people would, in fact, collapse and die from the strain of it. Maybe. There's dispute amongst historians about whether people actually died or if that's just kind of part of like the lore. But either way, it was a bad time, I would say. not
Yeah,
not
not
something you want to be part of.
not typically what you think of when you think of dancing.
No, no, generally considered a fun activity.
Fun, joyous activity. Yeah.
Yes. So several of the sources that I found said that there were like more isolated instances of dancing manias dating back to the 7th century, but I was not able to find like a good explanation of any of those. So kind of what's recognized as the first big dancing plague was in 1374 in Aachen, which was at the time part of the Holy Roman Empire in what is modern day Germany. So the dancing started there and then spread through other cities on the River Rhine, and then even into neighboring countries like France and the Netherlands continued to have their own like dancing plague incidents over the next like couple of years, which is pretty wild.
That is wild.
And the most famous instance of choreomania is the dancing plague of 1518.
Of course.
Everyone loves the dancing plague of 1518. So this
And
took
if you
place,
don't, what are you
and
doing?
if you don't, you just don't, you probably don't know about it. So I'm going to tell
Yeah.
you. So this took place in Strasbourg in modern day France. Someone, often credited as a woman named Frau Trofea, started dancing uncontrollably in the street in July. And by August, there were 400 people dancing with her. Also, maybe.
Oh,
So
yeah, so
some more historical dispute. 400 is very widely cited. Like this is generally the number you see, but then there are also some people I saw who were like, it was more like 50, which
that's a big discrepancy.
it's a big discrepancy. And also like a group of 50 people having a dancing mania would be very impressive, except when you were like, but could it have been 400?
Right, right. Yeah, don't start
Like
us
if
off
you,
at
yeah, if you didn't
400 and
prime
then
me
bring
with
us
400, I'd be impressed
Yeah.
by 50, but like that's a pretty a wide gap. So we do have like primary sources from the time of like people chronicling it, as well as like stuff that was put out by the city council because they were like, "What the fuck are we gonna do about all this dancing nonsense?
What are we gonna do about dancing?
What are we gonna do about this
A real
dancing,
footloose problem.
girl?" I literally have a footloose, footloose written down here because for first the physicians were like, well, they probably have to dance it out. So then the council was like, all right, we're going to provide musicians. Here's a place to dance so you can dance safely. But that just made everything get even wilder. And then they were like, ah, shit, not that. And they banned public dancing and even music. And
No dancing.
I've written down Footloose. So basically, it was a medieval Footloose situation where
Your classic medieval footloose situation, yeah.
totally, yes. Kevin Bacon, maybe instead of Frau Trofea, it was Kevin Bacon who started this wild dancing plague in 1518.
Were they in a warehouse or
So eventually, people were like, "You guys have to get the devil out of you. Like, cut this out.
classic?
Cut it out." And so people went to the shrine of, I'm not sure if it's Saint Vitus or Vitus.
Mm.
I'll say Vitus probably, Saint Vitus, and were healed. And so this just kind of, and so this is sometimes referred to as like the Saint Vitus like dance. Um, I wonder what the vibe was because, like, when you sit here and you tell me that there are people dancing in a mad frenzy, women are ripping their tops off, like, shit's crazy. But then someone was like, oh, you have to go pray about it. And then they're like, and they did. I'm like, that doesn't really add up. Like,
And they did.
if I was having a wild, like, titties out dancing frenzy, I don't think someone could just tell me to go to church and I would.
Yeah, I and I don't wanna jump ahead if we're gonna get into, like, plausible causes.
Yes, we will. We will.
Okay, but I think based on what I think the plausible cause of something like this is, I would lean towards agreement with you that going to church would not help.
There were a few more dancing manias in the 1500s, and then into the 17th century throughout Europe. And at that point, it seems like this just kind of stopped happening. And we will get into it because the big question, of course, is why?
Why? Why did that
Why?
happen?
Why would someone do this? So, as I said, like people at the time saw this, it seems like partially as an ailment, partially as like this is the devil. So,
Mhm.
um, unsurprisingly, there are a variety of modern theories. I will give you the spoiler alert in advance that there is not an agreement or a direct answer to this, but there are some plausible theories that I will talk about. The first one is bad bread. Uh, so
Oh.
some people blame this, also something I'm not sure that I can say, on ergotism. Um, so
Mm.
this is a psychoactive food poisoning, basically brought in by the ergot fungi that can grow on rye. This produces a toxin which is structurally similar to LSD, is known to cause convulsions and spasms, psychosis, as well as gastrointestinal symptoms, and eventually like gangrenous symptoms, and like your limbs will start falling off. Um,
And then you collapse from
yeah.
dancing.
So some professional weirdos may recognize that this has also been presented as a potential explanation for the Salem witch trials.
Isn't this
Um,
is that St. Anthony's Fire?
yes,
Okay, did you say that
yes.
already and I just missed
No,
it?
I didn't.
Okay.
No, you just
Yes.
you just know.
Yeah, okay, okay, okay.
So while this does definitely explain like some of the features of the dancing plague, a lot of the like more serious symptoms don't seem to be present. And as Midge just pointed out, like this was a known affliction at the time.
Mhm.
Like people already were familiar with this happening. So I would think that probably physicians would just be like, ah, yes, I know what this is. And it didn't generally make people dance
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
other things. So
Do
I
you
think this
remember the
one
famous dances of the Salem witch trials?
right. So I think this one's a little bit shaky. I'm not super sold on this.
Yeah.
The next option is mass psychogenic illness.
Woo.
Hey. So this is the argument that is supported most by Waller, whose article I read, which makes sense because he is a psychologist. So this is the idea that kind of like general community trauma was causing people to snap and have these
Mhm.
kind of weird frenzies. So he points out that in the 1374 big dancing mania followed along the Rhine River, which had just had an incredibly bad flood earlier that year. And that in kind of like the lead up to 1518, Strasbourg had been going through like widespread poverty and crops failing, plagues. So people were very on edge, dealing with a lot of trauma and probably a desire to disassociate from that, which relatable.
Yeah, same bestie. Yeah.
Very much. So he notes that in like modern possession cults, people, the like psychologists have noticed that it's much easier for people to enter this kind of disassociative trance state if they are living in a culture that already believes in like spirit possession and things
Mm.
like that.
Mhm.
So as we have discussed in many Ghouls Night In episodes, people of this time definitely believed that they could be cursed or possessed, set upon by witches, that the devil and demons were around. So, like, it's definitely good psychological groundwork
Yeah.
to go into this kind of weird state. It didn't really fit in this episode, but if anyone's interested, this article from him that I read also talked a lot about, like, hysterical experiences of medieval nuns,
Yes.
which is like a even more intense microcosm of kind of like the social vibe at the time. So it was really interesting to read that and kind of be thinking about those things in comparison, where these would be nuns who would like have spasms and visions and just kind of be like flailing around and yelling, and sometimes they're like, oh my god, it's demons after me, and sometimes they'd be like, oh, I'm being visited by angels. So
Mhm.
this was kind of a thing that could be happening at the time. And we do still have mass psychogenic illnesses today, which is, I should have put this in there. So, mass psychogenic illness is a term for when a large group of people experience like the same illness, but it doesn't appear to have a physical source.
Yeah.
And today, because of what our society is like, this is generally like people are blaming like chemical reactions or stuff. People suspect that they've been poisoned instead of like the devil. And you see like symptoms like mass nausea and spasms, like fainting, things like that. And the third reason is a dancing cult.
Uh,
Burr, 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 burr. So this is when I said I read another article. So there was an article I read from Robert Bartholomew that was called "Rethinking the Dancing Mania,"
mm.
and he cites some really interesting primary sources that were describing like pilgrims in colorful costumes as being part of this dancing. So he's kind of proposing that maybe the original dancers were like travelers who were doing kind of like a religious ritual, and
Huh.
locals were like, "Ooh, I think I would also like to throw off the chains of my society and join in on this crazy dancing." Um,
Almost
and
like
in
it was
a
like a performance art piece.
Yeah, or like, so it would be like, I think he like draws comparisons to like Greek and Roman like
Mm,
rituals, so things that would have been frowned upon by the Christian church at
sure.
the time, and that they were kind of maybe like covering up sort of that by being like, "Whoa, we're just crazy dancing."
We're just crazy
We're
pilgrims.
just crazy pilgrims doing crazy dance. And a lot of these stories like do involve like dancers kind of like parading from city to city. And of course, this is also potentially tied into like the mythology of the Pied Piper. Like there were
Mhm.
actual historical reports of like groups of children kind of going on these crazy dances around. And one thing that I appreciated is that he also calls out that a lot of the early scholarship about this was very much like, whoa, hysterical ladies getting crazy. And like claimed that like it was mostly women and stuff. And he's like, the primary sources do say that like both sexes were dancing. So I appreciate him for that. And I'm like, all right, like that's a good point.
Yeah, it wasn't just crazy ladies.
Right. Um,
Everybody was crazy.
Everybody's crazy. Yeah, so I feel a little bit like why not both about it?
Yeah.
Like I do think it makes sense that like at some point someone traveling was like, "Ooh, I'm doing a crazy dance." And that if local people were like, "Ooh, this is a spiritual trance. Maybe I'm also possessed by the devil and
Mhm.
I also need to do a crazy dance." But what were you was one of your things that you wanted to say in that, or did you have another thought?
Well, it kinda ties in, but also not.
Mhm.
I also just think, like, this is a time of extreme repression,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that's gonna come out in weird freaking ways. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, when you're especially when you're talking about, like, yeah, women, like, ripping their bodices open and, like, I'm sure that there was a freedom in being
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I'm possessed. I'm so
Yeah.
crazy silly." Like, it's not me, it's the devil. So that's why I'm saying, like, there would almost be this, carte blanche to be like, "Oh, I did this crazy dance for 2 weeks with my tits out, and then they took me to church and I prayed it away, and now I'm fine, and I can go back to society and be
Mhm.
a normal person," but it gave them this moment of, like, release, you
Definitely.
know? Especially, yeah, when you're to pile on to what you're talking about, these constant traumas and just being a person in that time period, like,
Right.
everything that was went with being a human being at this time was just awful. Um,
Truly. And like, I don't know, I think about like kind of made a comment about big like big rave and EDM scenes, which are not for
yeah,
me. But when you are in a big group of people dancing, like there is
there's a
kind of
freedom.
there's a freedom to it. There's kind of like a natural high to it. Like you very
Mhm.
much can lose yourself in it. Like
Much as
you're
Eminem predicted,
it's true.
you can lose yourself in the music and the moment,
It's
yeah.
true. I say as our great scholar Eminem once said.
Marshall Mathers once said, yeah.
But yeah, I mean it is, and so I think that it makes sense that, this may have been sparked off by like either people who were like, let's do a crazy dance, or someone who was legitimately having like a psychological breakdown
Yeah,
that made them dance. But I think that it makes a lot of sense that other people would be drawn to that, even if like not consciously, they'd be like,
right.
"Ooh, I gotta check out this dance." And suddenly they're like, "Uh-oh, am I
"Uh-oh, I'm
dancing too?"
stuck." I have to put out a hypothesis here
Yeah,
because we're talking about these breaking out after, like, mass cultural traumas. I'm like, is TikTok the modern dancing plague?
it could be. I mean,
Think about it.
people love
It
to dance their trauma
popped
away.
off after
Mhm.
COVID, and everybody was just on there doing silly little dances, and everybody was like, "Oh, I have to try this dance that I
Yeah.
saw so and so do." And everybody's like, "Why am I just watching all these people dance on the internet?"
Right? I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Modern dancing plague.
Modern dancing plague. We gotta work out the trauma through physical movement.
Yeah. Hey, the vagus nerve is a real thing. So
It's true.
maybe these people were quite literally shaking it off.
Shake, shake, shake it off. Yeah, I did not include in this episode because I was like, I'm just gonna focus on dancing plagues. There is a similar thing in Italy called tarantism,
Mm.
which was like a similar response, but they thought it was like that if you got bit by a tarantula, you would have to like jump up and do a crazy dance, basically. And like people would like wake up in the middle of the night, basically with like zoomies as far as I can tell, and be like, oh no, I've been bitten by a spider, I gotta dance.
Gotta
But
run it
then there
out.
would not be evidence that they had been bitten by anything. So it is a thing that that humans do, a thing that
Huh.
our bodies and minds compel us to do. So I think it makes a lot of sense that people
Wild.
could get pulled into kind of this mass dancing experience.
Yeah. I think I would definitely be susceptible to this.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I
I'm
fit the
thinking like
description.
now, like if I saw a group of people like standing there and crazy dancing, I would be tempted to be like, "Ooh, maybe I'll just kind of boogie my way over
Just
here,
kinda hop in.
just
Put
hop
my
in."
put
Probably
my
not
right
for
hand in,
I
take
was
my right
saying
hand out.
not for like a week, I
That
mean,
seems extreme.
but
Yeah.
I feel like I know people always laugh at me when I say this, but it was medieval times. Like they're not working like a 9 to 5.
Yeah, a
Like
week is
like a week, whatever, especially when, they're talking about like, oh, it's like mass trauma, people's farms are failing. You'd probably be like, well, I can
nothing
sit at my
better to do.
failing farm or I can leave and do a crazy dance for a week and my farm will still suck.
Yeah.
So,
That's true. That's true.
anyway, well, that's the dancing plague, Midge. That's
Oh,
choreomania.
what a time.
What a time. Uh, I want to know if you would join in the dancing plague, listeners. Let us know if you saw a big group of people. Would you hop in? Would you join the conga line? Let us know. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed hearing about dancing plagues and other such medieval tomfoolery, you can leave us a positive review about how much you like the show. And I do believe Midge has a Apple review to read for us today.
I do. This is a 5-star review from Creative Cool that
Ooh.
says listening to your podcast is the perfect inspiration anytime. I listen while working on my art and design. They
Hmm.
say do not meet your heroes, but definitely do with these two.
Aw.
Just as lovely in person when I ran into you in Salem, Massachusetts recently. Oh, that must have been
That's
me.
you.
That's
It wasn't me.
well, I guess you were in Salem pseudo recently, but yeah, I
Yeah,
guess that's me.
depends on what you mean by recently.
Yeah. So appropriate. I meant to mention at the time that I used to work in the museums, having studied art history, and even worked with a bones archaeologist. That's lit.
Ooh.
So when I blurted out how the Catacomb podcast was, oh yes, this was me. This was me. Podcast was so fun and interesting with no context, and you didn't skip a beat. I was so relieved. I do appreciate the artistry and care that goes into historical sites like that. Many, uh, many that you talk about on your podcast. Thanks for understanding my spooky enthusiasm for all things fun, vintage, history, and spooky. Keep up the well-researched work on your podcast, ladies. Love you both, Carol, artist from Salem.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I did meet Carol on the street, on Essex Street, and they were so lovely.
Excellent.
Um, yeah, please always feel like you can just word vomit at us about your passion
Oh
for
yeah.
spooky things. We're
I
never
was
gonna
gonna
think
say no.
that's weird.
No, no one has to give us any proof of why they like bones in order to
Yeah,
tell us they like
no.
bones. Just come out with it. It's all good.
Also, like, you have to understand, we made this podcast because typically we are the ones word
Yes.
vomiting at random people who know nothing, who don't care about how
Yes.
excited we are about these things. So we made this to find you guys and to like to have those conversations with you about how much we love weird stuff. So thank you for stopping and chatting with me. It was lovely to meet you. Um, and yeah, keep spreading the good spooky word.
Woohoo. Yes, appreciate it. If you guys would like to stay in touch with us, you can find the podcast at Ghouls Night In Pod on Instagram, and you can find me at Penny Snark.
And you can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time,
Goodbye.
goodbye.